Rex didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't shift his weight or so much as twitch an ear. He just stood there, frozen, eyes locked on a seam in the earth where the concrete of an old foundation met weather-warped wood. The wind howled across the Beckett property, stirring dust, hay, and the stale breath of a coming storm. But Rex remained still, centered, listening. "Rex?" Sergeant Ellis Granger stepped in behind the K9, one hand still resting on the open cruiser door. Rain tapped lightly against the brim of his cap. He took a step closer, boots crunching gravel, but the dog didn't flinch. His ears were up, body coiled tight, muscles trembling not with fear, but with decision. Ellis glanced around the field. The barn loomed ahead, hunched low with age. The old Beckett place had been empty for years, or so the county records said. A few break-in calls from teenagers, some loose livestock once, and one haunting report from a passing rail worker about hearing what he called a child's sob in the wind. That one had gone nowhere. But this wasn't nothing. Rex stepped forward. One slow, deliberate paw laid itself on the edge of the loose plank. His tail lowered slightly, not tucked, just tight with warning. Then he sat, back straight, chest high, staring down at the split in the floor as if it owed him an answer. Ellis's pulse ticked up. He crouched beside him, wiping rain from his brow. The air shifted again. Damp wood, old hay, and something underneath it. Something metallic and faintly wrong. Like old coins gripped too long in a child's hand. "You're not letting this go, are you?" Ellis murmured. Rex didn't look at him, didn't blink, just held his stare on the ground. The dog had done this once before, 3 years ago, in the foothills outside Fayetteville. That time, he'd stopped in front of an abandoned truck with one flat tire and a broken tail light. Wouldn't budge. An hour later, they pulled a girl out of the trunk. Alive. Barely. Ellis shifted back on his heels, swept the beam of his flashlight across the barn wall, then down again to the floor. The wood at Rex's feet looked slightly newer, the cut cleaner. He reached out, placed his hand next to Rex's paw. The board gave under the pressure. A chill crawled across his shoulders. Lightning spidered across the sky behind them. Thunder chased it a breath later. That was when the call came in. "Unit 12, come back." Ellis tapped his radio. 12 here. Go ahead." "Possible 1091 at the Beckett property. Caller says they saw someone moving behind the barn. Female. No known residents on record." Ellis stood. "Copy. I'm on site. I'll investigate." His hand brushed Rex's collar. The shepherd rose without command, alert and ready. Ellis scanned the far side of the barn, past the half-collapsed fence line. Nothing but shadows and stormlight. He didn't want to say it out loud, but he felt it. Something wasn't right, and Rex was never wrong. They circled the barn slowly. Ellis swept his light through the broken windows. Dust hung like breath in the air. An overturned shovel, a rusted toolbox, old ropes on a nail. Nothing moved until it did. From inside, the sound of a soft, wet cough. Human. Small. Ellis's chest tightened. He moved toward the barn's side door, only to find it chained from the outside. Not to keep animals in. To keep something. Someone. In. He turned. Rex was at the seam again, paw back on the board, head tilted just slightly like he was listening to the floorboards breathe. "All right," Ellis said under his breath. "We go in?" Back at the cruiser, he grabbed his bolt cutters, cut the chain, pushed open the side door, the hinges groaning like a warning. The smell hit first. Musty. Damp. Beneath it, something raw. Inside, the beam from his light hit the spot. The same spot Rex wouldn't leave. The floor had been patched. New nails. Fresh sawdust mixed into the old. "Rex," Ellis whispered. The shepherd let out a breath. Not a whine, not a growl. Just a low, heavy exhale that vibrated in the quiet like a heartbeat. Ellis pulled a crowbar from his belt, wedged it under the edge of the board. 1 push. 2. Then the wood gave way, with a sound like an old wound tearing open. Darkness stared back. Below, the start of a wooden stairwell. He clicked the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I have entry into an unreported substructure at the Beckett property. Potential human trafficking. Requesting immediate backup and child services." "Copy that, 12. Units en route." Ellis took a breath. Rex was already at the edge, peering into the black below. His ears were forward, but his body was still. Calm. Certain. Without waiting, the dog descended. 1 step, 2. Gone. Ellis followed, the flashlight beam swinging against damp stone walls. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, the beam flicked against something metallic. Then a chain. Then a child. She was no more than 8, pale, shackled at the ankle. Another cough came from the dark behind her. Then another. Then another. Ellis swept the light across the room. They were everywhere. 20 of them. Chained. Silent. Alive. Behind him, Rex stood firm, his body pressed slightly against the stone, as if he were holding up the weight of it all. He looked at Ellis, not for orders. He didn't need them, but as if to say, "This is what I heard. This is why I didn't move." And in that moment, Ellis didn't feel like the one who found them. Rex had never left them. Not for a second. The coffee at the Wheatford Police Department always tasted like burnt hope, but Sergeant Ellis Granger didn't mind. He stood by the window of his office, staring out at the pale grey morning rising over Main Street. The fields beyond the town were still wet from last night's storm, puddles caught in tire ruts and fence shadows, the kind of morning that smelled like quiet regrets. Rex lay by. The desk, his body curled but not relaxed. One ear twitching, always listening. Most folks in town thought of him as retired, a war dog gone soft. Kids petted him at parades. The mayor handed him a plaque once, for service, loyalty, and courage. They clapped and took photos. Rex didn't pose. He just watched the crowd with those dark, steady eyes, as if waiting for something no one else could hear. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, first with the 7th Infantry, then later attached to Special Forces. His record was clean, impressive, even. Until that day near Kandahar when the world blew open under a sheet of desert metal. An IED that killed his handler and sent Rex flying 20 feet through the dust and heat. Shrapnel tore through his shoulder, his ribs. Most dogs would have been euthanized right there. But Rex didn't go down. He limped. He bled. And then he crawled. 1/2 mile back to the forward base. Didn't stop until he collapsed on the medic's boots. Ellis had been there that day. Then just a corporal with a busted knee and a sniper's eye. He was supposed to be discharged the following week. Instead, he stayed. For Rex, no one knew what passed between them in that first moment. Just that Ellis had walked into the K9 recovery bay and sat on the floor next to the cot where Rex was bandaged up and trembling. Rex didn't growl. Didn't retreat. He put his head on Ellis's thigh and closed his eyes. After that, it was never really a question. When Ellis came home and rejoined the department in Wheatford, he didn't ask permission to bring Rex. He just brought him. People got used to it. Rex wasn't a patrol dog anymore. His injuries made him slower, and the town didn't need war-trained instincts. Not really. Wheatford had low crime, soft edges. The most they handled was the occasional drunk tank or domestic call. Rex became the unofficial greeter at the precinct. Kids dropped off donuts. Officers slipped him jerky under the table. He even had his own spot in morning roll call. But Ellis knew better. Rex hadn't turned off. Not once. He still scanned the room when they walked into a building, still checked vents and corners before he settled, still sat bolt upright when certain names crackled over the scanner. That look never left his face, the one that said, "I'm here. Say the word." And last night, standing over that split board in the barn, Ellis had seen it again in full. That razor-straight spine, that refusal to move, that breath caught deep in his chest. It had taken Ellis back to that outpost again, back to blood in the sand and heat in his throat. Rex had stared at the ground like it was talking to him, and Ellis believed him. He always had. There was a knock on the office door. Officer Lena Crowley, fresh from traffic duty, held out a file folder with a grimace. "You're not going to like this," she said. Ellis took the folder. Inside, a report from County Social Services. The Becketts' property, technically a registered private foster home, had been flagged for incomplete documentation. No background checks updated since 2016. No visits logged in over 6 months. The name Miriam Beckett was handwritten at the top. "She's got half the town's support," Lena said. "Sunday potlucks, charity drives, makes quilts for veterans. I mean, she's a walking statue." Ellis looked down at Rex, who hadn't moved since Lena came in. "She's hiding something," Ellis said. Lena frowned. "You got evidence?" "Rex," he said simply. She looked at the dog, then back at Ellis. "That's not going to fly in court." "It doesn't have to," he said. "Not yet." Lena shifted her weight, uneasy. "You sure this isn't leftover nerves from Fayetteville?" Ellis didn't answer. Didn't need to. He'd had that doubt too. Was he reading too much into the dog's tension? Seeing ghosts because of what they'd both survived? But then he remembered the smell in that barn, that cold draft rising from under the plank, and Rex's eyes locked on the floor like a soldier reading a map. He didn't just freeze up, Ellis said. He made a choice. Rex rose then, as if called, not by voice, but by rhythm. He stretched, shook the tension out of his shoulders, and padded to the door. He stopped there, tail low, waiting. Ellis followed. On the way out, they passed a wall of old service photos. One showed Ellis in uniform, standing beside a younger, leaner Rex on a tarmac in the Middle East. No smiles, just 2 sets of eyes staring into sun and smoke. Back in the cruiser, Ellis drove slow, letting Rex hang his head slightly out the window, nose working. The wind carried faint traces of old wood, oil, and something metallic again. Ellis's grip tightened on the wheel. The town rolled past in silence. School kids with backpacks, a woman watering her porch plants. No one looked like they needed saving. But Ellis had learned a long time ago, needing help didn't always show up loud. As they approached the outskirts, the Beckett property came into view. Just a barn and a house, white paint clean, porch swing still, American flag in the wind. But Rex straightened again, sat tall in the back seat. No sound, no growl, just that alertness returning like a breath held too long. Ellis slowed the cruiser, pulled over on the shoulder. "We're going back," he said. Rex looked at him through the rearview mirror, not blinking. This time, they wouldn't need a command, because Rex had already made his. The wind rattled the windows of the precinct in uneven gusts, pushing rain against the glass like impatient fingers. Inside, the station was mostly dark, save for the dim glow above the coffee pot and the pale flicker of a monitor on standby. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 a.m. Sergeant Ellis Granger was finishing a report that didn't matter, a loitering citation that would be forgotten by sunrise. His pen scratched, the last signature before he leaned back, rubbed the grit from his eyes, and reached for the lukewarm coffee. That was when the front door creaked. Not opened, not slammed, just creaked. The motion sensor hadn't tripped. No footsteps followed, but the breeze moved in like it had a purpose, and something small slipped across the floor just under the crack of the front door. A white envelope. It slid forward a few inches and stopped at the center of the rubber welcome mat. No name, no stamp, no markings at all. Ellis didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Then Rex stirred. From his spot near the window, the shepherd stood, slow and quiet, his body unfolding like a shadow rising. He stepped forward 1 pace, ears tilting, eyes fixed on the envelope. Ellis rose, careful not to startle the moment. He walked over, crouched, and picked up the envelope by one corner. The paper was cold, damp around the edges. He flipped it open. 1 sentence. The children still cry below the floor. He read it again, then a 3rd time. The language was too deliberate to be a prank. The handwriting neat but shaky, like someone trying to keep their fear from bleeding onto the paper. "Rex," Ellis said, holding the note low. The shepherd moved closer, nose rising slightly, breathing in. Then he turned, not randomly, not unsure. He walked toward the north-facing window, the one that looked out past the precinct lot, past the train tracks, toward the fields and the tree line and the old Beckett property tucked 2 miles down. He stopped at the glass and stared. Ellis followed his line of sight. But there was nothing out there, no movement, just dark land and darker sky. Still, Rex wouldn't budge. He didn't whine, didn't look back, only breathed once, deep, and set his stance like a statue carved to watch. Ellis read the note again. The children still cry below the floor. He thought about tossing it, calling it a hoax, some late-night nonsense from a bored teenager or an old ghost story come back to haunt a stormy night. But Rex had made up his mind. And Rex didn't chase ghosts. Ellis stepped over to the county map pinned near the file cabinets, ran his finger over the curve of Route 19, where it dog-legged through the fields and cut close to Beckett's land. The property had once been a working dairy farm. After her husband's death, Miriam Beckett converted it into a private foster care home, funded through her own charity foundation. The town loved her. She spoke at school assemblies, baked pies for the harvest fair. But something in Ellis's gut didn't sit right. He looked down at Rex, who was still at the window, unmoving. "I know," Ellis muttered. "You don't need me to believe it. You already do." A beat passed, then a shift in the dog's posture. Rex turned from the window, walked to the office door, and sat down beside it. Head tall, back straight. "Ready." Ellis stared at him, tension tightening his shoulders. "You think someone's still down there, don't you?" Rex didn't move. Ellis grabbed his coat. The radio crackled just as he reached the cruiser. "Dispatch to Unit 12. He clicked the mic. "Go ahead. We've got a noise complaint near the Beckett property. Caller reports strange lights near the barn. Possible trespassers." Ellis paused, eyes flicking toward the field beyond. "You're sending backup?" "Affirmative. Deputy Slater is en route." "I'm closer. I'll take point." "Copy 12. Rex was already in the back seat before Ellis finished speaking. Sitting, watching, unblinking. The rain returned as they pulled onto the road. Not a downpour, just that steady, unrelenting drizzle that blurred the fields into watercolor. Trees passed like slow shadows. As they neared the Beckett property, Rex's body shifted. His ears went up. His nose twitched. One paw pressed against the door. Then, for the second time in 12 hours, he growled. Low. Controlled. Ellis slowed the cruiser, turned off the headlights. Let the car roll to a stop at the edge of the gravel path. He didn't need night vision goggles. The barn was there, large, silent, spine slightly slumped from age. A floodlight above the side door flickered once, then died. And in the silence, Ellis swore he heard it. A thump, then a faint scrape. Metal against stone, or wood, or something worse. He looked back at Rex. The dog was staring past him, not at the barn, at the ground beneath it. Rex shifted forward, pressed his nose against the gap of the window, and exhaled a breath so slow it fogged the glass like a whisper. Like he was trying to say, "Right there." Ellis opened the door. The rain kissed his face. Rex didn't wait. He was out and moving, slow and sure, heading straight toward the barn. Not charging, not hesitating, just walking as if he already knew the ending. And it had begun long before they arrived. Ellis followed, hand on his flashlight. Inside the barn, everything looked the same as before. But the air had shifted. The stillness felt rehearsed. Rex sniffed once, then turned toward the back wall. He padded to the far corner, lowered his head, and tapped a board with his paw. Ellis walked over. He crouched. The plank was just slightly off color, not enough for someone to notice, unless they were built to see it. He pressed on the seam. It gave. A breath of cold earth rose to meet him. He looked down at Rex. The shepherd's eyes were not afraid. They were waiting. The note had said the children still cried, but it was Rex who had heard them first. The Beckett property looked like something out of a travel brochure for small-town America. White picket fence, clean shutters, a porch swing that creaked just enough to feel authentic. The hydrangeas near the front steps were in full bloom, heavy and blue, and someone had recently swept the walkway. Sergeant Ellis Granger parked at the edge of the drive, not quite pulling up to the house. It wasn't hesitation. It was instinct. He liked to observe before announcing himself. Old habit. Sometimes the truth needed a minute to show itself before it got a chance to hide. Rex stood in the back seat, rigid. His nose twitched once, then stopped. Eyes locked ahead. Not at the house. At the barn. Ellis followed his gaze. The structure sat 100 yards off to the right, tucked behind a grove of oaks. Weather-beaten, but not collapsed. A new lock glinted on the side door. Something about it. It felt too deliberate, too intentional, like a set piece trying too hard to look forgotten. Rex didn't look away. Ellis opened the door, boots crunching on gravel. Rex didn't wait for a command. He jumped down, tail low, shoulders tight. He walked not toward the house, but toward the barn, like he had heard something the night before, and now he was answering it. "Rex," Ellis said under his breath, a warning more than a call. The shepherd paused but didn't turn. His eyes stayed forward. The front door of the house opened before Ellis could knock. Miriam Beckett stepped out, shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders, a smile already set like a teacup on a saucer. "Sergeant Granger," she said, voice warm, welcoming. "I thought that was you." Ellis forced a smile, polite but unreadable. "Morning, Mrs. Beckett." "Please, Miriam. No need to be formal. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "I won't take much of your time," Ellis said, keeping his tone light. "Had a couple of reports about kids sneaking into old barns lately. Just checking in with folks who own outbuildings. Nothing serious." Miriam laughed. "Oh dear. I suppose mischief never really goes out of style." She motioned to the porch chairs. "We keep ours locked, mostly for safety. You know how old barns can be." Rex, meanwhile, had made his way to the barn's side. He sniffed along the seam where the wall met the foundation. Then, slow and deliberate, he lowered his head and placed one paw on the edge of the threshold. His body stiffened, eyes narrowing to a single focus point, a gap in the boards, no wider than a fingernail. Ellis watched him from the corner of his eye. "You all right with dogs, Mom?" he asked, a courtesy. "Oh, yes," Miriam said brightly. "I adore them, though I must admit yours seems a bit intense. He's just alert. He used to work for a living." She chuckled. A war dog, right? I remember reading about that in the paper. You rescued each other, didn't you? Ellis said nothing, just nodded. Well, Miriam continued, her voice softening. He might be picking up the scent of mice. We've had a bit of a problem with them lately, especially near the feed bins. Rex moved again. Not frantic, just precise. He pressed his nose to the floorboard near the base of the barn's outer wall, then sat down, just like he had the night before. Same posture, same message. Ellis stepped closer to the barn, crouching beside the dog. The wood felt colder here. The air smelled wrong. Not rot, something else, metal earth, something from underneath. He tapped the board with 2 fingers. It echoed. A hollow note. Dull, heavy. Behind him, Miriam's tone shifted slightly. Is something wrong, Sergeant? Just curious, Ellis said without looking back. You mentioned locking the barn. Would you mind if I took a quick peek inside, just to rule out any trespassing? There was a pause. A long one. Then Miriam spoke, her voice still polite, but a touch firmer. I'd really prefer you didn't. We had some shelves collapse last week, and I haven't had time to make repairs. Liability, you know. I'd hate for you to get hurt. Ellis stood slowly. Of course, I understand. He looked down at Rex, who had not moved. The shepherd's paw was still on the plank, his eyes now on Ellis, steady and unreadable. That unspoken thing passed between them again. Not a command, not a question, just confirmation. It's here. Ellis turned back to Miriam, who was already adjusting her shawl and smiling again. Well, if you change your mind, he said casually. I'll be on duty all day. We're just trying to be thorough. I appreciate that, she replied. This town is lucky to have you. Ellis offered a nod. Rex still hadn't moved. It was only when Ellis placed a hand gently on his collar that the dog rose. Not willingly, not eagerly, just obediently, like a soldier following orders he didn't agree with. They walked back to the cruiser. Rain began to fall again, light and steady. Inside the car, Ellis glanced at the rear view. Rex was still staring at the barn. Ellis reached into his pocket and unfolded the anonymous note again. The children still cry below the floor. He looked at Rex, then at the barn, and felt something cold move behind his ribs. Something was wrong, and Rex was trying to keep it from being buried again. Rain traced crooked veins down the windshield as Ellis sat in the cruiser outside the Beckett property, warrant in hand. It was just past 4 a.m. The fields were still dark, the clouds low and bruised. The world hadn't woken yet, but Rex had. The dog stood in the back seat, still and alert, eyes locked on the barn like nothing else existed. Ellis glanced down at the folded paper from the judge. Signed, sealed, legal. He didn't care much for paperwork, but today it felt like armor. He stepped out into the wet. Rex moved beside him without a word. Miriam didn't come out to greet them this time. No fresh shawl, no porch light. The only sound was the wind threading through the trees and the soft thud of Ellis's boots on the muddy ground. The barn stood like a secret waiting to be confessed. Rex pulled slightly on the leash, not frantic, just insistent, toward the same corner as before. That one board, that same seam. Ellis followed. He stopped in front of it and crouched. The wood still looked newer than the rest. Still smelled faintly of varnish and something darker underneath. Rex sat beside him and placed his paw gently on the board, almost reverent. This one, Ellis said quietly, as if he needed to ask. Rex didn't move. Ellis reached for the crowbar. It took 2 hard pries. The plank shrieked as it gave way, splinters curling like old skin. Beneath it, another layer of boards, narrower, fitted tight. He worked those loose too. A sour draught spilled out, low and cold. The smell of earth, rust, old sweat. Then something else. Blood. Dried and stale, but still sharp enough to hit the back of his throat. Rex stepped forward. No hesitation, he didn't wait for a flashlight or command. He lowered his body and slipped through the opening, one silent paw at a time. Ellis dropped to his knees and aimed the light downward. A stairwell. Wooden. Damp. Carved into the soil and reinforced with stone. The steps descended farther than expected, swallowed by dark. He heard Rex's claws clicking below. Then silence. No bark. No whine. Just silence. Ellis lowered himself down. The flashlight beam bounced off the wet walls. Roots snaked through the ceiling. The air got colder with each step, heavy with breath held too long. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a narrow chamber. The dirt floor was packed hard, the walls lined with warped stone. In the beam's edge, movement. A flicker, then a sound. Metal dragging. Ellis held his breath. The light swung right. Eyes, small, wide, blinking against the sudden glare. A child. Knees drawn to her chest. A chain looped around one ankle, bolted to the wall. Her hair was matted. Lips cracked. She didn't speak, just stared. Then he saw more. Another shape curled against the far wall. Then two more behind it. The beam landed on steel cuffs. A bucket. A mouldy blanket. Rex was there, lying low beside one of them. Body still, eyes locked on a boy no older than 8. The boy's hand hovered in the air. Unsure, then rested on the dog's back like he had touched a lifeline. The boy whispered something Ellis couldn't hear. Rex didn't react, just stayed. "I need units," Ellis said into the radio, voice flat. "Confirmed victims. We've got a chamber below Beckett's barn. Repeat, we have children, at least 10, still alive. Send medical, bolt cutters, everyone." The static replied, but Ellis didn't wait to hear it. He stepped deeper into the room. He counted as he went. 13, 14, 19. Then he saw the 20th. A girl, maybe 6, half-conscious, slumped in a corner near a rusted pipe. Rex moved toward her, tail low, ears back. He nudged her gently with his nose. Her fingers twitched. Then, weakly, they gripped the fur at his neck. Ellis swallowed hard. The ceiling dripped above him. Somewhere, deeper in the tunnel, a pipe moaned. But all he could hear was the sound of that little girl breathing. He crouched beside her, checked her pulse. Light, but there. "You're safe. Now," he said. She didn't open her eyes, but her hand didn't let go of Rex. Above them, muffled footsteps. Then a voice calling from the stairs. "Sergeant, we've got medics inbound." Ellis looked at Rex. The dog was still lying beside the girl, his body curved slightly to shield hers. He wasn't moving. He wasn't leaving. Neither was Ellis. He sat on the floor, hand resting gently on Rex's back, flashlight angled low as the storm continued to rumble above them. And in that quiet, heavy space beneath the earth, surrounded by children who hadn't seen daylight in God knew how long, Ellis knew one thing with absolute certainty. The only reason they were here at all, alive, breathing, was because one dog had refused to walk away. The room smelled like rust, mold, and something that used to be hope. Ellis kept the flashlight angled low as more children came into view, curled into corners, pressed against stone, blinking slowly as if waking from a nightmare that had lasted too long. Some didn't react at all. Others flinched when the beam passed over them. A few shielded their eyes, not from the light, but from what it might mean. Rex moved among them like a shadow with weight. Not fast, not loud, just there, methodical, focused. He didn't sniff the air for threats. He didn't posture. He walked up to the first child, a girl with matted braids and bruises blooming across her forearms. and sat down beside her. He didn't touch her. He waited. She didn't move at first, didn't blink, but her hand, hesitant and trembling, reached out. Just her fingertips at first, brushing his fur like she was afraid he might vanish. When he didn't, she laid her whole hand across his back and closed her eyes. Rex stayed perfectly still. Ellis crouched beside the next child. A boy, maybe 10, wrists red raw from the metal looped around them. The bolt cutters bit through the chain with a pop, and the boy jerked reflexively. "It's okay," Ellis whispered. "You're out." The boy didn't respond, just stared blankly past him. Another child whimpered, then another. 20 in total. Some chained, some simply too afraid to stand. Their faces didn't register Ellis as rescue. Not yet. They'd learned to fear footsteps. Rex walked through them all. One by one, he stopped beside each child, laid down, let them reach for him. Some didn't, but most did. Not in a rush, not with joy. Just the slow, tentative movement of a small hand learning that warmth didn't always mean danger. Ellis turned as a voice crackled through his radio. "Medical's here. 2 units at the drive. You clear for entry?" "Clear," Ellis said, his voice tight. Then from behind him, a whisper. He came back. He turned. A girl, 7 maybe, curled in a corner near a rusted pipe. She hadn't moved since they arrived. Her knees were pulled to her chest, chin tucked down. But now her eyes were open, staring not at Ellis, but at Rex. "He came back," she said again, barely audible. "I told them he would." Ellis swallowed hard. His eyes burned. Rex heard her. He turned, slowly padded over, and lay down across from her, nose to nose. She reached out and touched his ear. That's when the footsteps hit the floor above. Fast, not running, purposeful. Ellis stood in an instant, hand on his sidearm. Rex stayed low, but his head lifted, ears tracking the sound. Not panicked, just focused. He knew those steps. "Miriam," Ellis said under his breath. He shouted up the stairwell. "Hold position. Beckett is still in the house." No answer. He took the stairs 3 at a time. Rain pounded against the barn roof now, a rhythm too steady to ignore. The side door stood open. The padlock lay on the floor. Ellis burst out into the yard, scanning. No movement. The house was dark, the porch empty. Then headlights flared at the far end of the drive. Gravel kicked. A vehicle peeled away from the side gate, engine roaring through the storm. "Miriam!" Ellis yelled. He hit his radio. "Be advised, suspect Miriam Beckett fleeing in a silver SUV, heading eastbound on Carter Lane. Possible connection to felony abduction. All units respond." The radio crackled. Unit 4 responding. Setting roadblock at Ridge Cut. Another voice joined in. Unit 7 en route. Visibility's low. Ellis kept his eyes on the taillights, vanishing into the dark. She hadn't just run. She'd waited. Watched. And the second she knew the basement was compromised, she vanished like smoke. He felt Rex at his side now, rain slicked across his coat, eyes narrowed in the direction the car had gone. "Not today," Ellis said. He turned back toward the barn. Inside, the kids were being lifted out one by one. Officers carried them in blankets, some limp, some clutching Rex like they were afraid the world outside wouldn't hold. Paramedics moved quickly but carefully, working in pairs, whispering comfort where words might still hurt. One boy asked Ellis if Rex was staying. Ellis glanced at the dog, now soaked, panting quietly beside the entrance. "He stays," Ellis said. "He always stays." The last child was Sophie, the girl who had whispered about Rex coming back. She stood on her own feet, wobbly but upright, clutching the tattered collar of a stuffed bear. When she passed Rex, she stopped, bent low, and kissed the side of his head. He didn't move, didn't wag. He just met her eyes and let her go. Behind them, The storm rolled on. But inside that barn, something quieter had arrived. Not peace. Not yet. But presence. And that was something. Rain clung to the windows of the small clinic on the edge of Haven County, like the air itself was holding its breath. It was a single-story building, wrapped in peeling white siding and a rusted sign that read, Calvin Roque, M.D. A cracked sidewalk led up to the door, where Rex had already planted himself, unmoving, nostrils flaring at something that no one else could sense yet, not even Ellis. "You sure this is it?" Deputy Carter asked, glancing at the building with skeptical eyes. Ellis didn't answer. He watched Rex, saw the faint twitch in the dog's shoulder, the way his gaze was fixed, not on the door, but on the foundation beneath. Ellis stepped forward, his boots heavy on wet concrete, and knocked. A nurse opened the door, her smile a little too tight. "Dr. Roque isn't seeing patients today." "We're not here for a checkup," Ellis said flatly, flashing the search warrant. "We'd like a look around." The nurse hesitated. Rex growled low, not aggressive, but firm. Her eyes darted down, then back up, and she stepped aside. Inside, the clinic smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Linoleum squeaked under wet soles. Family health posters curled at the corners on the walls. In every way, it looked like a place built to offer help. Until Rex walked straight past the exam rooms and into a back hallway that led to a locked storage door. He pawed at the baseboard. Then again. Harder. Ellis knelt beside him, eyes narrowing. The boards here didn't match. He pried one loose with the butt of his flashlight, revealing a small metal hatch beneath. The hinges were recently oiled. "Basement?" Carter muttered. "No," Ellis said. "This wasn't built with one." He opened the hatch. The staircase beneath led into darkness. The air shifted, wet and metallic, with an unmistakable hint of bleach and something far older. Blood, perhaps, or time. Rex didn't wait. He descended without hesitation, his paws silent on the steps. Ellis followed, hand on his sidearm, light cutting through the dark like a scalpel. They emerged into a long, narrow corridor, walls lined with cinder block, painted over a dozen times but still cold to the touch. To the left, a steel door. To the right, a small room lit by one flickering bulb. That's where the smell was strongest. Inside was a makeshift lab. Not high-tech, but organized. Metal trays, vials, a small refrigeration unit buzzing in the corner, and next to it, a series of binders labeled with dates and names. Ellis picked one up. Inside, photos of children, ages, health notes, dosage schedules. Each profile ended with the same chilling stamp in red ink. Train schedule synced. "What the hell does that mean?" Carter whispered behind him. Ellis shook his head. He didn't know. But Rex wasn't interested in the papers. He was already at the far wall, pawing at a steel cabinet with urgent scratches. Ellis yanked it open. Inside, curled on a cot barely big enough for her frame, was a girl. Her hair was matted, her arms bruised, eyes wild with fear but focused. "Sophie," Carter gasped. "Oh my God." The girl flinched. Rex stepped forward, slowly, gently. He lowered himself onto the concrete, close but not crowding. His breathing was steady. So was his gaze. The girl didn't move for several seconds. Then one trembling hand reached out and touched his head. "He came back," she whispered. "He really came back." Rex didn't move. He just stayed there, silent as stone, as if promising he wasn't going anywhere. Ellis glanced around the lab again. Tacked above the door was a roster. Half the names matched the ones from the bunker. The others, missing, maybe relocated, or worse. A noise echoed above. A door slamming. Footsteps. "Roke," Carter said, drawing her gun. "No," Ellis muttered. "Miriam." But by the time they got back upstairs, the place was empty. The nurse was gone. So was the car from the gravel lot. Only the rain remained, hitting the ground like scattered shell casings. Ellis stood in the doorway, Sophie cradled in Carter's arms behind him, Rex at his feet. "She's 2 steps ahead," he said, jaw tight. "No," Carter said, watching Rex. "Not anymore." Because the dog had stopped growling and was staring down the road, nostrils flaring again. He had a scent. Again. And he wasn't letting go. Not this time. They arrived under the cover of early morning fog, the kind that muffled every footstep and made even trees look like ghosts standing guard. The train yard had long since been decommissioned, rusted tracks swallowed by weeds, signs eaten away by time and neglect. But the coordinates weren't wrong. The route marked TSS in the lab notes, the initials no one had understood at first, now made terrible sense. Train schedule synced. Ellis crouched behind an old switching box, binoculars scanning the forgotten rail lines. His radio crackled with static. Nothing moved, except Rex. The dog stood near the edge of the old platform, head tilted slightly, tail low, but steady. He hadn't barked, he hadn't growled. But every fiber of his body was tight, alert, waiting for something Ellis couldn't yet see. Then it came. The low groan of metal wheels somewhere in the distance, long before the sound should have carried. Rex heard it first. He pivoted sharply, facing west, and gave a single huff, sharp and sure. Ellis rose, heart beating faster now. The fog shifted. A train, barely visible, was crawling out of the tree line, moving like a ghost through the morning mist. No conductor in sight, no markings on the lead engine, just grey steel and silence. "What the hell?" Ellis breathed. As the train rolled to a stop, it didn't hiss like it should. No release of air brakes, no mechanical shuffle, just stillness. Then Rex bolted. Ellis swore under his breath and sprinted after him. The shepherd bounded over weeds and broken planks, eyes locked on a single boxcar near the rear, its door chained shut from the outside. As Rex reached it, he didn't bark. He placed both front paws against the metal and pushed, whining softly. "Rex, stand by!" Ellis called, his boots crunching gravel as he approached. "Let me check it." But Rex wouldn't budge. He stared at the seam of the door like it held a heartbeat. Then, from inside, something shifted. A faint scuff, a muffled cough. And then, a voice, tiny, raspy, hopeful. He waited. He knew we were still in here. Ellis froze. He dropped to his knees beside Rex and pressed his ear to the metal. More sounds, shuffling, soft sobs. Then a thud, something hitting the wall from the inside. Ellis backed up, yanked out a bolt cutter from his gear bag, and with 3 heavy snips, the chain fell. The door creaked open. And the smell hit first, metal, sweat, fear. Inside were 6 wooden crates, each no larger than a dog kennel. All had been drilled with vents. From one, a small brown hand reached out. A face followed, dusty, tear-streaked, maybe 9 years old. One by one, they emerged. Kids, some barely walking, others limping. None older than 13. No shoes. Some had plastic bracelets on their wrists, labeled with barcodes and initials. The oldest boy, maybe 11, stumbled forward and wrapped his arms around Rex's neck. He waited. The boy whispered again. He didn't leave us behind. Rex didn't move. He just sat there, letting the boy lean into him, letting them all touch his fur, one after another, as if the warmth of him was the proof they needed that they were finally safe. Ellis scanned the inside of the car. More notes. a clipboard nailed to the wall. Departure times, delivery codes, initials, MSR, the same ones found on Dr. Roke's files. The reach of the operation was bigger than they'd imagined, and far from over. A rumble in the distance snapped him back. Not another train. Engines, trucks, approaching fast. Whoever ran this pipeline had just been alerted. "We need to move," Ellis said, rising. Rex heard them. Rex circled gently, nudging the children toward the opening with a soft nose and low whines. He stayed behind them, every step deliberate, every glance toward the fog behind them like he knew what shadows might come through it next. By the time Ellis got them to cover, the trucks had arrived, but too late. No children, no agent, just a locked car swinging gently in the breeze, and a trail of paw prints leading into the woods. Rex didn't wait for permission. He'd already picked up the next scent. One Ellis didn't recognize yet, but Rex did. He lowered his head, gave a soft huff, and pressed forward. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not yet. They didn't bring Miriam Beckett into court through the front. She came in the back, shoulders hunched, face drawn, escorted by U.S. Marshals who barely looked her way. Her signature silk scarf was gone. So was the serene smile she used to disarm donors, and the air of untouchable philanthropy. Dr. Calvin Roke followed close behind, his white coat exchanged for a wrinkled orange jumpsuit. The courtroom in Haverly had never seen anything like this, not in its 100-year history. Outside, a line of townspeople wrapped around the block, whispering as they waited. Some had donated to Miriam's programs. Some had their kids treated by Dr. Roke. Most were still trying to figure out if any of what they'd heard on the news could possibly be true. It was true. All of it. Inside, the room was packed. Local reporters, federal agents, trauma counselors, and victims' families. There were no cries, no outbursts, just silence. That bone-deep kind of silence, like the air itself was holding its breath. In the hallway just outside the heavy oak doors sat Rex. He wasn't restless. He wasn't whining. He simply sat, tall, alert, waiting, his gaze fixed on the doors, as though listening for something only he could hear. His coat, still patchy in places from the burns, caught the light that streamed through the courthouse window. His breathing was even, calm. A photographer from the Haverly Tribune crouched, unsure if it was okay. Ellis gave a subtle nod. One quiet click. Later, that photo would go viral. It would run on the front page of USA Today, The Washington Post, and even Time, captioned simply, "The Dog That Listens." But in that moment, it wasn't for the headlines. It was for the boy. Jaden stood in front of the jury box, hands trembling slightly, voice no louder than a whisper. He wore a borrowed suit jacket that was a little too big and shoes that didn't match. But his spine was straight. "I didn't think anyone would come for us," he said. But then, I heard the breathing, outside the box, just breathing, not barking, not scratching. He paused. I wasn't scared, because he didn't leave. The courtroom didn't move. Not even when Ellis, seated in the back row beside a federal prosecutor, wiped something from his eye. The prosecution presented mountains of evidence, documents from the hidden lab, medical files falsified by Roke, financial records showing how Miriam funneled donations into untraceable accounts linked to transport networks. But it was Jaden's words that settled the room. A boy who had every reason to fear the world spoke of a dog that stayed. Rex still hadn't moved. Miriam was sentenced to life without parole. Roke took a plea in exchange for testifying against others involved, names that would take months to unravel, in networks that stretched far beyond Haverly. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a start. After the gavel struck, people filed out silently. One woman, older, paused before Rex. She didn't speak, didn't reach to pet him. She just looked him in the eyes, nodded once, and walked away crying. Later that week, Ellis would be invited to speak on national radio. They'd ask about the case, about the boy's testimony. But the question that caught him off guard came at the end. "Do you think he understood what he was doing?" Ellis had stared at the microphone. "No," he said finally. "I don't think he understood it like we do. I think he felt it. I think he heard them, even when we didn't." The host had paused. "And now?" "Now?" Ellis smiled. "Now the world's finally listening to him." Back in Haverley, Rex was given a new tag on his collar. Not a medal, not a title, just one word. Stayed. The old firehouse stood quiet at the edge of town, its brick walls softened by ivy and time. For years it had been nothing more than a relic. Shuttered doors, cracked pavement, pigeons nesting under its rusted bell tower. But today, laughter echoed from its halls. Soft voices, safe voices. The kind that didn't flinch at sudden footsteps or break under silence. The building had been reborn, not with ceremony but with intention. Walls that once echoed alarms now bore murals painted by the small hands of children who had learned, slowly, that not every sound meant danger. A new sign hung above the door, hand-carved from oak and weather-sealed to last generations. It read, "Rex's Watch." Inside, where the old trucks used to idle, there were reading corners and warm blankets. Therapy dogs rested at the feet of counselors. Every room had soundproofing, not to muffle pain, but to offer quiet when the world became too loud. A place that listened even when no one else did. Rex, now older, whiter around the muzzle, lay near the entrance on a thick bed lined with his old service blanket. His eyes tracked the movement of a young girl, no older than 9, as she walked slowly toward him, clutching a paper butterfly in her hand. Her name was Lucy. She hadn't spoken in almost a year. She knelt down beside him, the butterfly crumpling slightly in her grip. "Thank you for hearing me," she whispered. The room didn't move, didn't react. But Rex's tail gave the smallest thump against the floor, just once. Ellis stood nearby, one hand resting gently on the dog's head. His suit was more worn these days, his back slightly more bent, but his eyes held the same quiet fire they had the first day he met Rex. He looked at Lucy, then back at the dog beside him. "He always hears," Ellis said, "even when no one else does." Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Not reporters, not city officials, just neighbors, survivors, volunteers, people who understood what it meant to be unheard for too long. Near the statue in the courtyard, a life-sized bronze replica of Rex standing at attention, another child had written a message in chalk across the stone base. He stayed. They all knew what that meant. Rex didn't just sniff out danger or chase suspects. He didn't just save lives in the way officers do with flashing lights and sirens. He waited. He listened. When others turned away, he remained. In a quiet room off the main hallway, Ellis stepped into what used to be the captain's office. The desk had been replaced with a small wooden bench, the walls filled with framed letters from kids, now adults, who had passed through the program. He took a seat, his hand still on Rex's fur. Outside the window, dusk settled over the town like a quilt. There was no flashbulb ending, no grand medal ceremony, just a firehouse that had turned into something bigger than bricks and memory. And then came the final voice. This time, from us. "What about you? Has anyone, animal or human, ever stayed for you when no one else did? If Rex's story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own journey, or someone you once counted on when the world turned away, share it. Speak it. And if you believe in the power of listening, of staying, of dogs like Rex. Subscribe to our channel, German Shepherd Stories. Help us keep their stories alive. Because somewhere, out there right now, there's another firehouse waiting, another child waiting, and maybe, just maybe, another Rex. We'll be listening.